Hello, Keller Williams Associates. I'm your supervising broker, Darren Kittleson, and I want to just give you a little insight into a way you can lower your risk of lawsuit or losing in a lawsuit around home inspections. Now, I know we're in the spring market and it's getting fast and frenzied out there with offers on buyers' listings that come live and buyers trying to compete with 14 other buyers and all the other stuff, much like the last 3 years in the spring have been. So we're kind of back at the same. One of the things that we saw starting about 3 years ago that was a phenomenon that leaves me awake at night, like I can't sleep because I'm worried about this, is that waiver of the home inspection. Now, why would that make me not have much sleep? Because I believe, and we're starting to see it trickle in already, that we're going to see tremendous lawsuits filed against real estate brokers and the agents that write the offers and represent the buyers around this waived inspection. And it really isn't a great thing to do for anybody involved in the transaction. So let me just explain that first. Um, let's talk about the risk or liability. Here's where I see this playing out, and we're starting to see it already. Let's say that you represented a buyer, and when you sat down to draft the offer for them, they said, "Hey, our friends were finally successful getting their offer accepted, but they waived their home inspection contingencies. There was no contingency for inspection. We want to do that in our offer." That's what the buyer tells you. Now, by the way, that direction better come from the buyer. You should never suggest it to them. I would never, ever suggest to a buyer to waive the home inspection. I'm going to talk about some other options you could do in a few minutes, but that's one I would never do. So you talk to them about that, and that's what they're adamant about. So if they're adamant about doing that, and you've explained the risks, what I'm going to require you have with every transaction that has a waived home inspection where you represent the buyer is this form from the Wisconsin Realtors. I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can see it. Buyer acknowledgement of risk when not having a home inspection. This was created about a year ago, and I'm going to ask that you walk through this with the buyer when they want to waive that inspection, because it talks about their risk in doing that and our guidance that it's not in their best interest to do so. And the key to this, for our perspective, is the very last paragraph, and it says this, that it's a hold harmless clause. And it says the buyer acknowledges the firm and its agents have informed the buyer of the potential risk of submitting an offer with no inspection contingency. And it goes on to basically say they hold us harmless for any claims that might arise after the fact on this. So here's how I could see this playing out. Number one, they insist on not having the home inspection, right? And so you go through and the deal closes, and we're 3 years down the road, and major mechanical system fails, like the heating system. And the contractor comes out and takes a look at it and says, "Man, this thing was just been barely living through the last number of years from what I can see. How come your home inspector didn't catch this?" Right? And so the buyer then would say something like this, "Well, man, we were told we couldn't be competitive if we had a home inspection in our offer, and we lost out on 7 other houses, so we just had to do what it took to get this house." And so far, so good in that conversation. However, the estimate gets handed over to the buyer. It's $22,000 for a replacement system. The system that's there is not repairable, and the buyer now has just been hit with this big, shocking number of 22,000. Well, what do most people do when they're hit with something shocking like that? They reach out to legal counsel. So they hire an attorney. The attorney files a lawsuit on behalf of that buyer for the cost of that system replacement, and then they tack on as many other fees as they possibly can. And they also name as co-defendants not only your seller, because the seller is the one who transferred the property, but you as a listing agent and me as your listing broker. And we have to defend that. Now, it's going to be tough to defend that if we were on that side of things, because the buyer's going to have selective memory. The buyer's going to say, "Well, our agent told us if we ever wanted to compete, we couldn't have a home inspection." By the way, you should never say that to somebody. And now we're in a lawsuit. So if we had this document, that would probably put things to rest pretty quickly, at least from the brokerage perspective and you as the agent, because you could say, we went through that, and I actually have a signed affidavit or document from the buyers that says I explained it to them, and they chose to do without an inspection anyway. So do you see where that could help you? Second thing is, how do you get around not the waiver? I mean, so instead of waiving home inspection, what else could you do to still be competitive and make sure that the buyer gets a clear understanding of the condition of the property? And what I would do is I would write into the inspection contingency under additional provisions a forgiveness number of items that are discovered during inspection, considered defects, and their repair costs. For example, it might say this inspection contingency, buyer agrees not to pursue seller for any any repairs or replacements on anything with an aggregate cost of $10,000. Meaning, as they find a list of things that are wrong with the property, if the total cost of those repairs or replacement isn't $10,000, the buyer's letting that slide. If it's over 10,000, though, that then the contingency kicks in about how you can handle notice once given and all the rest of that. But until that, now here's the thing I always think about. If that number, I use 10,000 as just an example, but it's fairly significant. If you have that in there and the seller comes back and says, we don't want that inspection contingency in there, we're going to counter it out, I would fight tooth and nail to keep that in there. And I would be suspect of what the seller might know as to why 10,000 isn't enough, that they want to kick it out completely. Now, flip side is your sellers, when you represent them, accepting an offer without an inspection contingency is likewise high risk for them, for the very scenario I gave you. So I would really, really encourage you to get masterful at talking about the value of a home inspection, both to your seller and to your buyers. You can manage it in a way using those forgiveness numbers, if you will, and still get your offers accepted. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Again, remember this form, and I'm going to ask starting now that we use this every time there's a offer that we're representing the buyer on, that they choose to waive their home inspection, so that they can acknowledge, and we'll have it in this documentation in writing, that they had the explanation of what the benefits were. So that's all I have today. Thanks so much. Have an awesome month of April. Things are hot out there. Show up. I always learned this years ago. It said the secret to success in this business is show up, tell the truth, and don't be attached to the outcome. You do that, showing up every day, you're going to have a great year. I'm sure that we're going to see a tremendous amount of good things happen this year. Thank you so much for giving me 5 minutes.